Okay. It's been about, wow, it's been a year yet? I don't know if it's been a year since the last time I was here. Feels like it's been. Since last November, I guess that was the last time I was here.
It's a long time.
Yeah, it's a long time ago. I'm glad to see everybody is here. I hope the Lord's been keeping you well.
Yes.
And I recognize some of the faces. Tonight, the people that have been to my sessions before are kind of familiar with me and my style or kind of how I do it. And for those who aren't familiar with me, basically, I tend to try to go a little bit off the beaten path and giving people information and the ability to tie things in that they may have heard or may have partially studied, or things that you may have been taught about the occult nature of history and academics. When I say occult, the word occult means hidden history. This class is designated self-discovery, and so anything that helps you understand yourself and the world that you live in better comes under this heading. So I try to bring things to the table that people may not have heard before, or they may have heard before in their pursuit of higher knowledge. When I mean higher knowledge, I mean knowledge about what's going on, how does it all tie in, what are the spiritual aspects of it. Because the spiritual aspects are the important aspects of it. We got all kind of political things going on, we got economic things going on, cultural things, media things, etc. But behind all of it, it is spiritual. And people that sign up for a class like this, and the way Shema'yah and Vonda gear the class, are already kind of in that search for the spiritual truths about things, tying it in. So, to kind of add to the disclaimer again, I'm going to say some things tonight. I don't mean to step on anybody's toes or contradict anybody's religious upbringing or anything like that. I'm just going to present some things that I've done years of research on. Some of them you might be familiar with. Some of them may segue into things that you already know. Some of them may sound completely like the strangest thing you've ever heard. I will try to give you as much backup information and take some notes, because there may be things that you want to research or follow up on yourself. Okay, the title of tonight's lecture is going to be The Origins of Evil in Human Civilization. We all know that there's no shortage of evil in the world. And these days seem to be, and maybe it's just because of our perspective on it, or my perspective on it from, me growing up in the 60s and 70s, that things have gone from bad to worse in a lot of areas in this country and the world in general. We have all kinds of things going on today that it just seems that people are just a little bit less humane, a little bit less courteous, a little bit less compassionate towards their fellow man. It seems that our government officials don't really care about us, even though our duly elected officials, they don't seem to be looking out for us. The government's shutting down and going into gridlock. God forbid you were a federal worker, because for a couple of weeks you didn't get a check. So a lot of these things are happening. Our economic way of life seems to be going down the drain. I'm going to get into a little bit of that. The bottom line is, when we use the word evil, because a lot of people use the word, you just have to get into the kind of the mechanics of the word, or where did the word evil come from, and what does it really mean? In simple truth, without getting complicated about it, evil could be most accurately defined as anything that you are willing to do and participate in that will affect another human being in single or in plural in ways that you yourself would not want to be affected. You can get into the semantics of evil, and there are some people who are philosophers, and who say there's no such thing as evil. Evil is an invention of the human mind, etc., etc., etc. One man's meat is another man's poison, so forth and so on. If you really want to define evil, evil is anything that you're willing to do to somebody that you wouldn't want them to do to you. Or anything that you would like done to you that you're not willing to do for someone else. That's evil. That's the definition of sin. So that makes it real clear. That means if we talk about some of the great icons of evil in the world, people like Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, and Genghis Khan, and people like this, you go, well, if I wouldn't want to be shoved into an oven, I don't shove you into an oven. If I don't want to be discriminated against, I will not discriminate against you. Etc., etc., etc. So that takes all of the philosophical meanderings out of evil. That takes that out of it. So now you got a real clear definition. What's evil? What's a sin? Anything you're willing to do to somebody that you don't want them to do. That's it. Now, when we look in the world, what do we see? We see a great abundance of people willing to do things to other people and willing to participate in situations that breed circumstances that are painful, diminishing, and dehumanizing to their fellow man. We see it in all walks of life, from the government to the private sector, to the social, to the cultural. We see it amongst our neighbors. Sometimes we see it even in our own families, friends, associates. The thing is, what brought this state about? All the misery, suffering that's going on in the human world that we live in today has an origin. Where did it come from? A lot of people say, well, people just ain't no darn good.
People are afraid.
She used the word fear. You got the eraser?
To the purple.
Everybody knows who I am by now, so I can erase this.
Rob didn't feel it.
I hope not. We're going to get in there right now. I hope not. I don't think so. I don't think I fit in the description. She said the reason why people do a lot of things is because they're afraid. And she's right. Fear is the most prevalent negative emotion. It is the king of negative emotions. It is where all negative emotions emanate from is fear. There are only really two emotions in the human emotional spectrum. Fear, which she mentions one, and love is the other one. Right on, sister. You are on the ball.
Thank you.
You are on the ball. What is your name?
I'm Barbara.
Barbara, you are on the ball. If I have you in some of my other lectures, I'm going to have to sneak you in somewhere. Okay, make things go smooth. So fear and love are the two major emotions. Every negative emotion is a type or form or variation of fear. If you have anger, which is one of the most prevalent ones that we see today, there's a lot of angry people. You look at somebody wrong on the subway or a bus or something, they want to chew your head off. You know, someone wants to brush up against somebody by accident, they want to fight. Say the wrong thing, even if it's in good intentions. You know, you could get shot. We're shooting each other left and right with it. And a lot of these things, anger. But anger is just another form of fear. Anger is, I fear I'm not going to get my just due, so I have to put on my gorilla suit and make people pay attention to me or do right by me. You could have envy. Now, a lot of people would go, well, envy, that's got nothing to do with fear. It is. Envy is, I fear that I'm not going to get something that somebody else has that I want. I'm not going to get my fair share. So it's still fear. Still fear. And then, of course, you have hatred. And a lot of people are confused and they say, well, the only real love and hate. Hate is the opposite of love. No, hate is another form of fear. I feel that some situation or some person or something that reflects everything in life that I fear makes me project my negative emotions into that thing. It's like when Hitler singled out the Jewish people, the European Jewish people in Germany during World War II, or the days preceding World War II, has the source of all of Germany's problems. Or sometimes we get the same treatment as African Americans in America, where when people want a scapegoat, they like to point at us and say, you know, those Negroes, if one for them, everything would be running smooth. So hatred is also a form of fear. Then on the other side, you got love. And all the positive emotions that you can think of. For instance, you might have a feeling of hope. That's a form of love. You might have a sense of peace. These markers aren't quite agreeing with me.
All of them are doing that?
Yeah, I tried the
Try that.
The first one seems to be a little bit better.
Those other ones are there other ones in there?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'll get it. Peace, gratitude,
What about joy? No?
joy. Joy and peace are very closely related, actually. What they are is they're a sense that everything's going to be okay. I'm grateful for what I have. I may not have everything that I desire or that I need, but the things I do have, I acknowledge them. When you're in that state of mind, gratitude, hope, empathy, you feel for another person's situation, all those things are forms of love. And those things make the world work. Those things make the world actually a better place. And if we tune into that vibration, the love vibration, most of the stuff that we don't appreciate about life that are making us miserable and making the world a very dark place to be, most of those things wouldn't exist. Now, at one point, those things didn't exist. And I'm going to go into that without further ado. Again, some of this is going to sound controversial. I'll try to give you as much reference as well as I can. I'm going to use the Bible tonight as a reference point for a lot of things for two reasons. One, many of us are familiar with the Bible. We have encountered it at some point in our lives, whether we've encountered it in church, whether we just picked it up out of curiosity, whether we were taught it in Sunday school, whatever. I'm not saying that the Bible is the only holy book in the world that is worth something. There are other books. There is the Quran. There is the Bhagavad Gita. There is, lots of books. And all of them, in their true forms, before they were tampered with, edited, or had stuff displaced or hidden, all had a central theme running through it. So most of the things I want to say are not only in the Bible, they are also in some of these other works, if you care to read them. But what happened at some point is spiritual systems became religions. And religions are manipulated to stop, halt, or divert spiritual recovery or spiritual advancement. At some point in the existence of this universe, when there was absolutely no differentiation between energy or matter, when the universe was at point zero, absolutely at rest, no light, no heat, no up, no down, the Creator, whatever you want to call him, Yahweh, Jehovah, whatever you want to call him, her, it, I'm not even putting the gender differentiation on it. The divine Creator, the source of all things in this universe, showed up and started the process of creation. How long ago that was, nobody knows. At what point that happened in the universe, nobody knows. And exactly who that being is, in detail, I don't think anybody knows that either. I don't think there's a religious book in the world that's got the exact 9411 on God. But there are clues and hints and other things that give you enough of a picture that you can know enough about it. Now at that point, the divine Creator had two great enemies. And no, one of them is not Lucifer. He comes along later. And he's not even really a great enemy either. Although he does figure prominently in what's going on here. And yes, he does exist. And I'm going to show you tonight that he exists. And he's got lots of names. That's the name out of the Bible. You read other places, he's got other names. Don't get caught up in names. One thing, if you haven't already done this for yourself, and many of you already have, as you study spiritual things and occult things, and by occult, I mean hidden. The word cult means occluded or hidden. When you study hidden knowledge, a lot of people tend to associate occult with black magic and spiritualism and demonology and all these things. And all those things they have their place in it. But in general, occult knowledge is really spiritual knowledge of how the world works. What's behind the scenes? How does all this work? And there are people that don't want you to know. And there's a reason they don't want you to know. And one of the reasons is if you know, they can't control you very easily. So when you start studying that and you take that as a pathway of study, don't get caught up in the names of things. Because names tend to carry an emotional content to it. If you've been brought up with Jesus, and somebody says to you, Krishna, you might go, well, I don't know nothing about that Krishna thing. That's that Indian thing. That's that Indian thing. I don't need Jesus. Well, as you study, you find out that Krishna and Jesus is the same guy. Osiris, Krishna, Jesus, Buddha. Because that guy, it was simply a manifestation of the divine consciousness of the Creator. And the Creator came along in the beginning and he had two enemies. And I use the word enemy metaphorically because God really has no enemies. The first one was what you might call, the word I guess I could use for it would be neutrality, oblivion, entropy. That's the word they use in physics. Entropy is when matter and energy decay to a point where there is no differentiation between them and you reach point zero. In other words, nothing. It's like this blackboard. Well, they don't change the blackboard to a whiteboard. It used to be a blackboard.
Yes.
We can't have nothing. We can't have a blackboard. It used to be the blackboard. This whiteboard was absolutely empty until Shema'yah came in and wrote something on it. And then I came in and wrote something on it later. Until then, there was nothing on it. Well, the universe was like that, and God came and wrote creation on it. But the natural state of the universe is nothing. Without God, it would go back to nothing. So God's existence is the only thing that is causing creation to emanate forth so that we have all of these experiences that we have. These are all emanating from God. The sun comes up every day. The planets rotate around the sun in a precise orbit. Not just in this galaxy, but in other galaxies. The cells in your body do what they do. The atoms in the molecules do what they do in a precise order because of God. That's the proof that God exists. Now you have certain people, like certain physicists that believe in chaos theory. They believe this is all just some random, like a monkey threw tomatoes up against the wall and boom, it was artwork. That's what some people believe. What's the guy in the wheelchair? Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking is a proponent of chaos. He thinks that the universe is a result of just random chaotic actions, chemical actions and reactions, and it just happens to be this. And of course, if you look at him, and you look at the situation he's in, I gather he probably would believe that. But I don't even think he really believes that. I think he's just a proponent of that because he's an agent to be a proponent of that. But no.
And he's mad.
There's
Angry.
He's angry. Why? You know, I mean, he's got a reason to be angry. But there's a reason why he's in that wheelchair. We'll get into that too. The bottom line is that chaos would happen, and it is what would happen if God took his hand off of creation and let it go back to the neutral set point that it originally was, which is nothing going on. So the fact that there's something going on is because of God. The second enemy God has, other than neutrality, is that things will work, but they won't work correctly. That means the sun will come up today, but it won't come up tomorrow. The neutrons and protons will circulate around the core nucleus of an atom this minute, 5 minutes from now they'll stop, and thus you'll just disintegrate. All that happens in a sequential order and continues to happen because of the fact that God is holding chaos at bay. So entropy and chaos are God's two greatest opponents. And I say that in an allegorical sense because God doesn't really have opponents, but these are two things that if you took God out the picture, this is what you would get. There was no element or material that human beings used to make anything that wasn't already here before they got here. Somebody had to put it here. So, God showed up, he brought forth creation, he did all these things. In the process of creation, he made other things to assist him. I'm using the word him, I'm not putting this because there is a feminine element to the God force also. The mother goddess energy, absolutely. So God needed assistance, and God made assistance. Some people want to call them angels. That's a good name as any. But at some point, God decided, I want to create beings with the potential to be like myself, so I am not the only thing in existence that's like this, that has these attributes. And that's when God decided to make us. And I'm not saying this is the only world God did this on. I'm sure it's been done. There are other worlds out there with intelligent beings and who are like we are, made in the image of God. But they're not here right now. So we're dealing with us. When I say us, I mean all human beings on the planet that are human. There's only two types of people on the planet. Humans and non-humans. I'm going to get to that. There are people on the planet that are not human.
That are not human?
That are not human. They are not what you are, and I'm going to show you out of the Bible exactly what I'm talking about, because God himself made sure that he was very clear on that point to warn you that there are people walking amongst you that are not human. Now, when God moved in this process of making the universe, and he made assistants to help him with this, when he got to the point where he decided to make beings who in potential could eventually, if they so choose to do so, they would have the attributes within them, built within them, that they would one day be able to imitate God. They would be like God. They would be able to commune with the Creator. But it would be a process. It wasn't something that was going to happen overnight. It was just that they were being imbued or endowed with the attributes that give them the potential to become like God. It's like your 1-year-old baby has the potential to grow up to be President of the United States, head of a multi-million-dollar corporation, one of the greatest athletes in the world. They have potential to be anything. But they have to go through a process in order to get to the point where they realize that potential. One of the reasons why you are all in this class is because you're trying to realize your potential, right? You're trying to learn as much as you can to realize your human potential. So you joined a class called self-discovery. That's the reason why you did it. Well, God created human beings in His own image. We've been taught that a lot. Anybody's ever gone to church has heard that. God created us in His own image. What does that mean? I'm going to run into a guy one day and he was like Shema'yah. Don't get me wrong, Shema'yah's a sharp dude. I don't know. What does that mean? In God's image. Does he look like me? Does he look like you? Physically, that's not what it referred to. The physicality, the shell, the container. The shell and the container we have is merely a genetic adaptative mechanism. So the theory of evolution is not wrong. You got this big fight between creationism and evolution. They're both right. The part of us that's created in the image of God is the spiritual part of us. That is what makes us truly human and truly capable of surpassing mere humanity, spiritually speaking. Well, some of these assistants that God made in the process of bringing the universe into being, call them angels, whatever you want to call them, when God got to the point where He proposed to make this being that would have Him in it, told all of the angelic host, acknowledge that I am in them, and when you see them, in potential, you'll see in me. So the same authority you bow down to in me, you bow down to in them. They all pretty much did it, except one of them. One of them decided, I'm not going to do that. That thing that you're talking about making, I'm greater than that. I've been with you for, how long was Lucifer, and Lucifer is who I'm talking about, with God, helping God do things. God was the CEO. God made, Lucifer was one of the assistant CEOs. He was one of them. He wasn't the only one, but he was one of them. And he had underlings under him. God tell him what to do, he tell them what to do. That's why they said Lucifer was an angel of light, illumination. Kind of like a super fire elemental on a very high level. How many people here are familiar with elementals? They know what elementals are. Ever heard the word elemental? The world has elements in it. Earth, air, fire, water. Well, whether you know it or not, all of these elements have spirits in them, living spirits with varying degrees of intelligence. And if you know certain occult practices and rituals, you can activate these elementals and communicate them with them. Elementals in water, elementals in fire, elementals in earth, elementals in the air. It's one of the mediums of power that sorcerers and magicians and people who deal with those kind of arts is one of the things that they use to make things manifest on the physical plane. Well, getting back to Lucifer, Lucifer was something God manifested to help him make things or administrate the things that he made. He didn't need Lucifer to make anything, he just to administrate things. And Lucifer decided that when God created human beings and told him bow down to that, not bowing down to the human being, that doesn't even know its potential yet, but the divine essence in the human being, which is like me. And Lucifer went, nah, I don't want to do that. That's beneath me. And so what happened was he began to generate the emotion of pride. And out of this emotion of pride came the Luciferian rebellion. Now, if you read the book of Revelations, or if you've ever read or familiar with it, there is a passage in the book of Revelations that goes into the fall of Lucifer. And it says that there was war in heaven. And Lucifer, the great dragon, was cast out of heaven and drew a third part of the angels with him. That's what it says in the King James Version. King James Version is written in English, but the original book of Revelations, which is called the Apocalypse, it's a Greek word. It was written in Greek, and there are versions of it in Aramaic, not English. So, the modern King James and New World Translation versions and a lot of these other versions, when they translate it, it sounds very religious. There was war in heaven. Where's heaven? Where's that? On top of the roof? If I climb up on a step ladder, am I going to get to it? When NASA shoots these satellites and rockets into space, are they going to heaven? Is that heaven? Where's heaven?
Some other dimension.
Very nebulous. Once again, right? It is another dimension. But it has corresponding points to this dimension. Because everything in those other dimensions have key corresponding points to this dimension. They are just on a different frequency. They do not occupy a different point in space or time even. They simply occupy a different vibrational frequency. It's like when you are listening to your radio and you turn to WMMR, but you were listening to WDAS earlier, and then a couple seconds later you turn the dial to WMMR. Does WDAS can cease to exist? No. You just changed the frequency, but that radio station is still broadcasting that frequency. If you tune back to it, you're going to get it. And all it takes is an instant. Same thing with television. If you're watching Jay Leno on Channel 6 or whatever, I don't know what channel Jay Leno comes on now, and somebody else is watching something on Channel 3, and if you change the channel from Jay Leno to what's going on Channel 3, does that cease to exist? No, you just changed the channel. So, in another room next to this room, there's another class going on. At the same time. It's just separated by this partition. Well, that's what the vibration is. So, when Lucifer decided that he was going to have this rebellion, it happens in a specific place that vibrates to a key place in this universe. Now, if you read the pseudepigrapha Bibles,
How do you spell that?
P-P-S-U. They have the correct translation from the Greek. And in the Greek, it says there was war in the constellation of Orion. War in the constellation of Orion. Yeah, so they can know. I got this at the right end.
That boy out.
There we go. How many people have heard the name Orion? Okay, Orion is a star system. And in Greek mythology, Orion was known as the hunter. He was a character out of Greek mythology that was a hunter, great hunter. And when he died, they made a constellation after him. Well, the Greeks said that the war between Lucifer and God happened in the constellation of Orion. So they told you exactly where it happened at. They didn't make it nebulous. They didn't make guesswork out of it. They said, well, heaven, where's that at? They told you it was in the constellation of Orion. And they go on to say that the Dracos, not the dragon, the word we use, we get in English dragon, is stemming from the Greek word Dracos, from which we also get the subword draconian. And the Dragos were cast out of heaven, or cast out of the constellation of Orion. And they drew a third part of the stars, that star system, with them. Now, it doesn't sound religious anymore. It sounds like something that happened. It sounds like a record of a military conflict and the fallout of that conflict. And it exactly was. But like she said, we're dealing with dimensions. Now this is where it's going to get a little complicated, so I'm going to go a little slower, because you really got to get this concept. Because a lot of times you will study things that seem to be contradictory. People will say, well, there's one theory. Well, you got this guy, Zachariah Sitchin, and he says that aliens came down to Earth and they created human beings from monkeys, and then, you know, this is how this got started. Then you see another person say, well, wait a minute, we got all these UFOs coming from outer space, and the government's keeping it secret, and flying saucers, and all these things. Well, how does that fit in with angels and demons and spirit? Like, it gets confusing. People go, wait a minute, somebody lied to me. No. All of it is happening, but all of it's on different dimensions. And each dimension affects the next dimension. So if you read in the Gospels of Christ, where he said, beware what you bound on earth is bound in heaven, and what you loose on earth is loosed in heaven. When he hung out after his resurrection, after he was crucified and he rose again, he hung out with the disciples for about, what, 120 days it was about? 120 days in his resurrected body. He's walking around with disciples, teaching them things that most of them that don't even show up again. He said, okay, it's time to wrap it up. I'm getting ready to go. You guys can't follow me where I'm going, but listen, in my Father's house are many mansions. I go there to prepare a place for you. If it was not so, I would have told you. What does that mean? My Father's house are many mansions. He was explaining it to them in the language of that day that was the best way for him to get them to understand. He's talking about exactly what the sister's talking about, different dimensions. In God's creation, there are multiple universes. Not just multiple worlds, multiple universes. Now, if you read the Vedanta out of the East Indian spiritual systems, when they start talking about Krishna, and they start talking about all of the different worlds that the devotees of Krishna have access to, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about all of these different dimensions.
Did you hear 96 million light years away, they just found the Kepler telescope, more Earth-like worlds?
Of course. And that's just in this, that's just in this dimension.
Yeah.
Because you have to understand, when God differentiated matter and energy, everything became wavelengths. And within wavelengths, there are particles. And if you study quantum physics, you'll understand, or even if you get into string theory or any of those things, what they're talking about is the fact that on a different frequency of vibration, different things exist, but they can occupy the same place at the same time. This is a frequency that we're on. Now, how do we get on this frequency? Because it's a pretty miserable frequency. We're going through a whole lot of changes.
Is that like parallel universes?
Exactly. Parallel universes, parallel frequencies, just like the frequencies on your television set. Channel 6 is a different world from Channel 17. It's a different world from Channel 56. It's a different world from HBO, the movie station. It's a different thing. But they're all existing, and all you got to do to tune from one to another is change the channel on your remote control, which in fact is all you're doing is switching from one frequency to another. Well, they couldn't have even created that television set or radio sets or anything if they hadn't understood the difference between different frequencies and what you can do with broadcasting one frequency and another frequency. And I'll tell you a secret, there are frequencies within frequencies. That's the weaponizable form of energy transmission, but we won't get into that tonight. We'll get into that another night when we talk about alternative hidden technologies. Same way that you get broadcasted television waves and radio waves, you could also be getting broadcasted electricity, which would make it free. The guy that discovered alternating current, Nikola Tesla, wanted to give you free electricity. He wanted to sell you an antenna and then set up a tower whereby he would pull energy out of a vacuum and then transmit electricity to you the same way that you can be transmitted radio waves and television waves, because all of it's transmittable. And he knew how to do it, and J.P. Morgan pulled his funding so that he wouldn't be able to do it. Then they did some other things to him, because once they saw what he was on to and what he was trying to do, he became an enemy of the people that are in control of the world at that time, and they're still in control of it at this time. So, moving along quickly, you want to understand that things happen on vibrational frequencies, and so one frequency affects another frequency. So in heaven, this war took place. Lucifer rebelled out of pride. Out of that rebellion, it affected its counterpoint position in reality in this material vibration, which was in the Orion star system. They went to war. The representatives of Luciferian consciousness in Orion and the representatives of God consciousness in Orion mirrored their spiritual antecedents, and they went to war. Because when Lucifer went to war with God, and when I say go to war, it's not like you turn on the television set and it's War and Peace or Gladiator or something like that, or World War II. It didn't happen like that. Because if it happened like that, you could say to yourself, wait a minute. If God is omniscient, he knows everything. He's all powerful. He can do anything he wants. He's everywhere present, so you can't hide nothing in secret because he's right there. And he's all loving, so he wouldn't really want all this chaos and misery. Well, he knew Lucifer was going to do this, and he must have known. He knows everything. Why didn't he just cut him off before he even got there? Cancel his check. Has the thought ever crossed your mind when they teach you about the Luciferian rebellion, or all this misery is coming because of Lucifer? He said, well, God bringing Lucifer, why didn't he just cut him off at the pad? Why didn't he just put him in check before he even got a chance to even do it? I had that question for decades.
That's why I don't believe in the Savior.
Well, you may change your mind after tonight. You just may change. I do my job, right? You might reconsider that. The reason that God did not do it was 3 reasons. And I've done a ton of research to dig it from every angle I can dig it with, and by the grace of God, I've been able to see certain things. And all of it, you can see it too, if you look at the right material. God knew that in order to create this thing, there was checks and balances. God conceives something that never existed before and brings that into conceptualization. That's the creative part of God, to bring forth something from nothing. Total originality. Then once that is conceived on a conceptual level, it has to be brought into the dimension of manifestation. There is a part of God that facilitates that. That's why they go in the Bible, in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was with God. Well, that's what they're talking about. That's the part that makes stuff happen. Then there was another part of God that goes, okay, once you conceived it, and once you've made it happen, manifest, it has to fit in with everything else that you conceived and manifested in a balance. The relationships have to be right. If the relationships are not correct, you get chaos. God's other great enemy, entropy and chaos. So that means if God brings something to manifestation, there has to be laws governing the existence of that thing. One of the laws that God created was free will. Any beings of higher intelligence that are capable of thinking for themselves automatically have the facilitation of free will, the faculty of free will. So Lucifer had free will. Now God, being precognitive, meaning able to see all realities and all potential acts and where these acts will lead, knew that there was probably 1 trillion scenarios in which Lucifer was going to rebel. He also knew that there was 1 trillion